Welcome to the mental grand. They laughed when I showed up in my old work jacket. They whispered when I asked for a glass of water. My own nephew called me a beggar at his engagement party, and my daughter-in-law told me I was embarrassing the family. What they didn't know was that I owned every single brick of that celebration venue, and in exactly 47 minutes, I was going to teach them all a lesson about respect they'd never forget. My name is Robert Mitchell, and for 38 years, I worked as a structural engineer and property developer in Philadelphia. I built my life from nothing, raised two sons after my wife passed, and invested every dollar I earned into real estate across 3 states. I wasn't flashy about it. I drove a 15-year-old truck, wore practical clothes, and lived in a modest house on the edge of town. My boys knew I worked hard, but they never knew the full extent of what I'd built. I thought humility was a virtue. I thought teaching them to value work over wealth was the right path. I was wrong about one thing, though. I was wrong to think that silence about success would earn me respect. My older son, Marcus, became a corporate lawyer, the kind who wears Italian suits and talks about billable hours at dinner. My younger son, Kevin, went into finance, married a woman named Stephanie who came from what she called old money, and together they created a life that looked perfect on the outside. They had the big house in the suburbs, the luxury cars, the country club membership, and slowly, over the years, I watched them forget where they came from. I watched them forget that the grandfather who raised me cleaned floors in a factory, and that their own father once ate beans on toast for 3 months straight to save for their college funds. The invitation to Kevin's son Nathan's engagement party came in the mail on a Tuesday. It was one of those heavy, cream-colored cards with raised gold lettering, the kind that cost more than I used to spend on groceries for a week. The venue was being held at the Grandview Estate, one of the most prestigious event venues in the area, overlooking the river with gardens that had been featured in magazines. I knew the place well. I'd admired it for years before I bought it 18 months ago through one of my holding companies. My sons didn't know. My grandchildren didn't know. Nobody in my family had any idea that the empire I'd quietly built included 17 commercial properties, 12 residential buildings, and yes, the Grandview Estate. That's when I realized they had no idea who they were messing with, but I kept that knowledge to myself and marked the date on my calendar. I showed up to the party on a Saturday evening in April wearing clean khakis, a button-down shirt, and my comfortable work jacket that I'd worn on job sites for 20 years. It had paint stains and a small tear near the pocket that I'd never bothered to fix. I looked exactly like what I was, a man who valued function over fashion, a man who'd spent his life building things with his own hands. I parked my old truck in the lot between a Mercedes and a BMW, grabbed the gift I'd wrapped myself, and walked toward the entrance of my own property. The venue coordinator, a young woman named Jessica who worked for the management company I'd hired, smiled professionally at the entrance. She had no idea I was the owner. I'd structured my businesses that way on purpose, layers of management and LLC names that kept my involvement private. I nodded to her and walked into the grand hall where the celebration was already underway. Crystal chandeliers hung from 20-foot ceilings. Round tables were draped in white linen and decorated with elaborate floral centerpieces, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. It was beautiful, and it was mine, every expensive detail of it. I spotted Kevin almost immediately, standing near the bar with Stephanie and a group of their friends. He was wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage used to be, laughing at something someone had said. I walked over, gift in hand, ready to congratulate my grandson on his engagement. But before I reached them, I heard Stephanie's voice cut through the ambient noise of the party. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about my own family. She was talking to one of her friends, but her voice carried. "I cannot believe Kevin's father showed up looking like that," she said, her tone dripping with disgust. "I specifically told Kevin to mention the dress code. This is an upscale event, not some backyard barbecue." Her friend glanced in my direction, and I saw the exact moment she registered what I was wearing. The pity in her eyes made my stomach turn. I kept walking, pretending I hadn't heard, but the damage was done. I felt it, that familiar sting of being judged, of being found wanting by people who should have known better. Kevin saw me approaching, and his expression shifted. It wasn't quite embarrassment, but it was close. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice slightly strained. "You made it." He didn't hug me. He didn't introduce me to the group he was standing with. He just acknowledged my presence like I was an obligation he had to check off a list. I handed him the gift for Nathan, a carefully chosen vintage watch that had belonged to my own father. Kevin took it without looking inside, set it on a nearby table with a dozen other gifts, and turned back to his conversation. I stood there for a moment, invisible in a room of people who shared my blood, and then I walked away to find somewhere quiet to stand. I found a spot near one of the tall windows overlooking the gardens, poured myself a glass of water from a side table, and watched the party unfold. I watched my grandsons, Nathan and Christopher, laughing with their friends, young men in their 20s who'd grown up with every advantage. I watched Marcus arrive with his wife and teenage kids, all of them dressed like they were attending a royal wedding. And I watched as, one by one, various family members noticed me and then quickly looked away, as if acknowledging me might somehow diminish them in front of their wealthy friends. The moment that broke something fundamental inside me came about 30 minutes into the evening. My nephew, Derek, Marcus's oldest son, was standing with a group of his college friends near the bar. He was 23, cocky in the way that privileged young men often are, and he'd been drinking. I saw him glance at me, then lean to his friends and say something that made them all laugh. Then he walked over, and I thought, maybe, just maybe, one person in this family still had some decency. I was wrong. "Hey there," Derek said, his voice loud enough that people nearby turned to look. "Are you lost? The staff entrance is around back." His friends erupted in laughter behind him. My face burned. "Derek," I said, quietly, keeping my voice steady, "it's me, your Uncle Robert." That's when I realized how far my family had fallen from the values I'd tried to teach them. He looked at me like something he'd scraped off his shoe. "I know who you are," he said. "I'm just saying you might be more comfortable with the other workers. This is kind of a high-end event, you know?" The humiliation was complete. I was being mistaken for hired help at my own grandson's engagement party, in my own venue, in a venue I owned, by a kid whose college tuition I'd helped pay for when Marcus hit a rough patch 10 years ago. But I didn't say any of that. I just stood there, watching Derek walk away, listening to the laughter fade as he rejoined his group. I could have left. Part of me wanted to walk out, get in my truck, and never speak to any of them again. But something else was building inside me, something cold and calculated. I'd spent 38 years building an empire in silence. I'd lived modestly, invested wisely, and accumulated wealth that none of them could imagine. And they had just made the biggest mistake of their entitled lives. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to my lawyer, Harold Chen, who'd been handling my property acquisitions for 15 years. "Are you available for a call in about 2 hours?" I typed. His response came back immediately. "Always for you, Robert. Everything okay?" I typed back, "Everything is about to be perfect." Then I put my phone away and decided to enjoy the rest of the party in my own way. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, watching and listening. I heard Stephanie tell someone that she'd insisted on the Grandview estate despite the cost, because only the best would do for our family. I heard Marcus complain about the price of the open bar to one of his law partners. I heard Nathan's fiancée, a sweet girl named Emma, who'd always been kind to me, quietly ask Kevin where Grandpa Robert was, and I heard my son respond, "He's around somewhere, don't worry about it," as if my presence was something to be managed rather than celebrated. The dinner service began, and I found myself seated at a table in the back of the room, far from the family tables at the front. I was placed with some distant relatives I barely knew, and a few plus-ones who looked as uncomfortable as I felt. The irony wasn't lost on me. In my own venue, at my own grandson's party, I'd been relegated to the cheap seats. I ate the filet mignon that my management company had contracted from one of the best catering services in the state, drank the expensive wine that came from my venue's carefully curated cellar, and I planned. What I discovered in those quiet moments would give me all the ammunition I needed. The speeches started after dinner. Kevin stood up and talked about how proud he was of Nathan, how he'd grown into a fine young man, how the family had always valued hard work and integrity. The hypocrisy was stunning. Marcus gave a toast about family legacy and staying true to your roots. I almost laughed out loud. Then Nathan stood up, and for a moment, I thought maybe this younger generation might be different. He thanked his parents, thanked Emma's family, thanked his brother and friends. He looked right past the table where I sat and never mentioned my name. That's when I decided exactly how this was going to end, and the satisfaction of what I was about to do filled me with a calm I hadn't felt in years. After speeches, people moved to the garden terrace for cocktails and dancing. I stayed inside, walking slowly through the venue like I was seeing it for the first time. I ran my hand along the mahogany bar that I had custom built. I looked at the original art on the walls that I'd personally selected from local artists. I stood in the wine cellar viewing room, where temperature-controlled glass showcased bottles worth thousands of dollars. This was mine, all of it, and they had no idea. I made my way to the venue manager's office on the second floor, a space the guests never saw. Jessica was there, reviewing the evening's timeline with two other staff members. She looked up when I knocked on the open door, professional concern crossing her face. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked. I smiled. "Jessica, my name is Robert Mitchell. I'm the owner of this property." Her expression changed instantly from polite concern to shocked recognition. She'd seen my name on documents, but never my face. "Mr. Mitchell," she stammered, standing up quickly, "I had no idea you were attending this event. Is everything satisfactory? Do you need anything?" I held up my hand to stop her. "Everything is perfect. Your team has done an excellent job. I just need to make a small adjustment to the evening's schedule." I explained what I wanted. Her eyes widened, but she was professional enough not to question it. "Of course, sir. We can do that. When would you like this to happen?" I checked my watch. It was 9:15. The party would go until 11. "Let's say 10 o'clock. That gives everyone time to have their fun, but ensures they're all still here for the finale." Jessica nodded, already making notes. "I'll coordinate with the DJ and the catering manager. Is there anything else you need?" I thought for a moment. "Yes, I'll need the microphone, and I'll need you to make an announcement that the property owner wants to say a few words. Don't mention my name. Let it be a surprise." If you're still watching, I promise what happens next is worth every second. Stay with me, and don't forget to subscribe to The Mental Grand for more stories of justice and dignity. I went back downstairs and found a quiet corner where I could see the whole terrace through the floor-to-ceiling windows. My family was having the time of their lives. Derek was dancing with a girl who looked barely old enough to be in college. Marcus and his wife were holding court with some of their social circle, everyone laughing at something he'd said. Kevin and Stephanie were posing for photos near the garden fountain, the perfect, successful couple. Nathan and Emma were slow dancing, and honestly, they looked happy. I felt a pang of guilt about what I was about to do to them on their special night, but this lesson was bigger than one party. This was about respect, about humility, about remembering that money doesn't make you better than anyone else. At 9:55, Jessica caught my eye from across the room and nodded. The DJ faded out the current song, and Jessica's voice came over the sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment, the owner of the Grandview Estate has joined us this evening and would like to say a few words to celebrate this special occasion." There was polite applause, the kind you give when you're not sure what's happening, but you know you should be gracious. I saw Kevin and Marcus exchange glances, probably wondering who owned this place and why they'd want to speak at a private event. I walked slowly through the crowd toward the small stage area where the DJ booth was set up. People moved aside, some of them recognizing me from earlier and looking confused, others seeing me for the first time and clearly wondering who this old man in the work jacket was. I climbed the 3 steps to the platform, took the microphone Jessica handed me, and looked out at my family. The truth was about to set me free and destroy every assumption they'd built about who I was. "Good evening," I said, my voice steady and clear through the speakers. "My name is Robert Mitchell, and I am the owner of this beautiful venue where we're celebrating tonight." I watched the confusion ripple through the crowd. I saw Stephanie's face go pale. I saw Kevin's expression shift from confusion to something that might have been dread. I saw Derek freeze mid-conversation, his drink halfway to his lips. "Some of you know me," I continued. I'm Kevin's father, Marcus's father, Nathan and Christopher's grandfather, Derek's uncle. I'm the old man in the work jacket who some of you thought was lost or confused or maybe even part of the catering staff. The silence was absolute. Even the crickets in the garden seemed to be holding their breath. I bought this property 18 months ago through one of my investment companies. I also own the building where Marcus's law firm leases their offices. I own the shopping complex where Stephanie likes to buy her designer handbags. I own the apartment building where Derek lives while he's finishing college. In fact, across 3 states, I own 17 commercial properties and 12 residential buildings, with a combined value of somewhere around $47 million. I heard someone gasp. I saw Marcus literally stumble backward like he'd been physically struck. Kevin's face had gone from pale to red, the color of deep shame creeping up his neck. I worked for 38 years as an engineer and developer. I lived modestly, invested wisely, and built an empire that I thought I'd eventually share with my family. I thought teaching my sons the value of hard work, the importance of humility, and the dignity of living within your means was more important than showing off wealth. I thought respect was something you earned through character, not clothing. I paused, letting that sink in. Tonight, I was called a beggar by my own nephew. I was told I should use the staff entrance. I was seated at the back of the room like an embarrassment you hide from your important friends. My own sons couldn't even introduce me to the people they were standing with. And you know what? That's on me. That's my fault, because I was so busy teaching you humility that I forgot to teach you respect. I was so focused on not spoiling you with wealth that I let you become spoiled by your own arrogance. What I said next came from 38 years of quiet disappointment and silent heartbreak. Nathan, I said, looking directly at my grandson, who stood frozen on the dance floor with Emma, I'm sorry that your special night has turned into this. You're a good kid, and Emma, you've always been kind to me. This gift was supposed to be my way of celebrating your future. I pulled a folded envelope from my jacket pocket. Inside this envelope is the deed to a 3-bedroom house in Wilmington, fully paid for, in your name. It was going to be my engagement present to you. But after tonight, I think I'll hold on to it until I see whether you've learned anything from your family's behavior. Nathan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Emma had tears streaming down her face. I turned my attention to Marcus and Kevin. I had plans, I told them. I was going to retire next year and start transitioning my properties to family management. I was going to bring you both into the business, teach you what I'd learned, and set up trust funds for all my grandchildren. But you've taught me something important tonight. You've taught me that money without character is just numbers in a bank account, and respect without humility is just empty performance. I looked at Derek. You called me a beggar, son, but let me tell you something about beggars. Real beggars, the people who actually struggle to survive, often have more dignity and kindness than you showed tonight. They know what it means to need help, to depend on the generosity of others. You, on the other hand, have lived your whole life on a cushion that was built by people like me, people who worked until their hands bled and their backs ached, and you thought that cushion was something you earned. The shame on their faces was complete, but I wasn't finished yet. I had one more truth to deliver, and this one would change everything. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice still calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority. This party will continue. You'll finish your celebration, you'll dance and drink and pretend everything is fine. But starting Monday morning, every single one of you is going to learn what it means to stand on your own. Marcus, your firm's lease is up for renewal in 3 months. I'm not renewing it. You'll have to find new office space at market rates without your father's discount. Kevin, the line of credit I extended to you 5 years ago for your business venture, it's being called in. Full payment due in 90 days. Derek, your rent-free apartment, you've got 60 days to find a new place. And Stephanie, I looked directly at my daughter-in-law, That shopping complex you love so much? I'm donating my share to a charity that helps homeless families. Maybe when you shop there now, you'll remember that beggars have value too." The microphone felt heavy in my hand, but I had one more thing to say. "I'm not doing this to destroy you," I told them. "I'm doing this because I love you, and because someone needs to teach you what I failed to teach you myself. Respect isn't about money. Dignity isn't about designer clothes. Family isn't about who can afford the biggest house or the fanciest party. Family is about showing up for each other, even when it's not convenient. It's about recognizing the people who sacrificed so you could have opportunities. It's about saying thank you to the old man in the work jacket, because that old man is the reason you're standing here at all." I set the microphone down on the DJ's table and walked off the stage. The crowd parted like water as I moved through them. Nobody spoke, nobody tried to stop me. I walked through the grand hall, past the bar I'd built, past the wine cellar I'd stocked, past all the beautiful, expensive details that had impressed them so much, and I walked out the front door into the cool April night. Behind me, I heard Jessica's voice over the speakers, professional and composed. "The bar remains open and the party will continue as planned. Thank you for your attention." I got in my old truck, started the engine, and sat there for a moment with my hands on the wheel. My phone started buzzing almost immediately. Kevin calling, then Marcus, then text messages started flooding in, so many that my phone couldn't keep up. I turned it off and drove home. The silence in my truck was more peaceful than any sound I'd heard in years. The satisfaction I felt wasn't about revenge. It was about finally, after decades of being invisible, making myself seen. The aftermath came quickly and exactly as I'd planned, and it was more perfect than I could have imagined. Kevin showed up at my house on Sunday morning. He looked like he hadn't slept, his hair uncombed, his eyes red. I let him in, made coffee, and we sat at my kitchen table. The same table where I'd helped him with his homework 30 years ago. "Dad," he started, his voice breaking. I don't even know what to say. I sipped my coffee. "You could start with, 'I'm sorry.'" He nodded, tears actually forming in his eyes. "I'm sorry. We're all sorry. What happened last night was inexcusable. The way we treated you, the things Derek said, the way Stephanie talked about you. There's no excuse for any of it." I let him sit with that for a moment. "You're right," I finally said. "There isn't." Kevin looked up, hope flickering in his expression. "Is there any way to fix this? Any way to make this right?" I leaned back in my chair. "That depends on you, Kevin. That depends on whether you've actually learned something or whether you're just scared about the money." He winced, but to his credit, he didn't look away. "It's not about the money," he said. "I mean, yes, calling in that loan is going to hurt and we'll have to make some changes, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I looked at you last night and realized I didn't recognize my own father. Not because you'd changed, but because I'd stopped really seeing you. You were just Dad, the guy who wore old clothes and drove a beat-up truck. I never asked myself why. I never wondered if there was more to the story. I just judged you for not being more like us, like the people we'd become." Those words, raw and honest, started to crack the wall I'd built around my heart the night before. Marcus came by that afternoon. He brought his wife and his kids, including Derek. Derek could barely look at me. He stood in my living room, this tall kid who'd thought he was so clever, and he cried. "Uncle Robert," he said, his voice shaking, "I'm so sorry. What I said to you was horrible. I was drunk and stupid and trying to impress my friends, and I said the cruelest thing I could think of. But none of that is an excuse. You didn't deserve that. You deserved respect, and I gave you humiliation instead." I looked at this kid, really looked at him, and I saw something I recognized. I saw a young man who'd been given too much too easily and never learned the hard lessons that make character. But I also saw genuine remorse. "Derek," I said, "do you know why your rent was free?" He shook his head. Because your dad hit some financial trouble 10 years ago, right when you were starting high school. He was too proud to ask for help, but I saw the signs. So I bought that building and told him the owner was giving him a family discount. Every month for 10 years, I've subsidized your rent because I wanted you to have stability. And last night, you called me a beggar. The weight of that truth crushed him. I saw it in the way his shoulders collapsed, the way fresh tears spilled down his face. I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you. I swear to God, Uncle Robert, I will never forget this lesson. Over the next few weeks, something remarkable happened. My family started to change. Not overnight, but slowly and genuinely. Kevin paid off his loan by selling the vacation property they'd bought in Florida, the one they used twice a year. He said it felt good to eliminate the debt, to start fresh. Marcus found new office space, smaller and less flashy, but he told me his firm was more focused now, more efficient. Derek got a job as a site supervisor for a construction company, working actual manual labor for the first time in his life. He called me after his first week. "Everything hurts," he said, but he was laughing. "I had no idea how hard people like you worked. No idea at all." Stephanie was the last to come around. She showed up at my house 3 weeks after the party, without Kevin, just her. We sat on my back porch, and she was quiet for a long time. "I grew up with money," she finally said. "My parents, my grandparents, everyone in my family had money. And somewhere along the way, I started believing that people who didn't have money or didn't show their money were somehow less than me, like wealth was a measure of worth." She looked at me with something that might have been shame. "You terrified me that night," she said, "not because of what you took away, but because you exposed something in me that I didn't want to see. You showed me I'd become the kind of person I would have hated when I was younger." I didn't absolve her. I didn't tell her it was okay, but I listened. The thing is, Stephanie, it's not too late to change who you are, but you have to want it for the right reasons. Not because you're afraid of what I might do, but because you genuinely want to be a better person. She nodded. "I'm working on it," she said softly. "Every day, I'm trying." Nathan and Emma postponed their wedding, not because of drama, but because Nathan told me he wanted to earn the house I'd offered them. "Grandpa," he said, "I don't want it as a gift right now. I want to prove to you that I'm not like the people you saw at that party. Give me a year. Let me show you who I really am." That conversation, more than anything else, gave me hope. The real victory came 6 months later when my entire family gathered at my modest house for Thanksgiving. No fancy venue, no catered meal, no pretense. Just my small dining room, my kitchen, and a turkey I'd cooked myself. They all showed up in casual clothes. Marcus wore jeans. Kevin helped me set the table. Derek mashed the potatoes and actually did a decent job. Stephanie brought a pie she'd baked herself, and she was genuinely proud of it. We squeezed around the table that was meant for 6, but somehow fit 12, and before we ate, Kevin asked if he could say something. "Dad," he said, looking directly at me, "6 months ago, you taught us the hardest lesson we've ever learned. You showed us that we'd become people who valued all the wrong things, and instead of walking away from us, instead of writing us off, you gave us a chance to do better." He paused, emotion thick in his voice. "I just want you to know that we're grateful. We're all grateful, not for the money or the properties or any of that. We're grateful that you loved us enough to tell us the truth, even when it hurt." The message I want to leave you with today is simple but powerful. Respect isn't given because of what you own or what you wear. Respect is earned through character, through integrity, through how you treat people when you think nobody important is watching. My family learned that lesson the hard way, but they learned it, and in the end, that's what matters. If you're watching this and you've been in my position, if you've been judged or dismissed or treated like you don't matter because you don't fit someone's idea of success, remember this. Your worth is not determined by their perception. Your value is intrinsic, built through years of hard work and sacrifice and love. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give people is the truth about who you are, delivered at exactly the moment they need to hear it. If this story moved you, if you felt the pain of that humiliation or the satisfaction of that justice, do me a favor. Hit that like button, leave a comment telling me about a time when you were underestimated, and subscribe to The Mental Grand for more stories about dignity, respect, and the quiet power of people who build empires in silence. Justice doesn't always come with thunder and lightning. Sometimes it comes with an old work jacket, a calm voice, and the courage to finally show people who you are. Thank you for watching. And remember, respect is earned, dignity is inherent, and family is about so much more than blood. It's about showing up, speaking truth, and loving people enough to help them become better than they are.